this video, I'm going to show you 5 easy tricks to make your armies look like a tight, coherent force, which will help you turning them into the masterpieces they deserve to be. I decided to use part of my new Infinity Force to demonstrate these tricks, but you can apply this to every other system, whether it's Kill Team, Necromunda, Mordheim, Warcrow, Spearhead, Age of Sigmar, 40k, you name it. If my painting career was a human being, it would be old enough to drink, and one of my earliest contacts with proper miniatures was Infinity the game, back when it first came out. I sold most of my original Pan-Oceania army, but these few leftovers illustrate what the problem with my first ever attempt at an army was. Every mini looked a lot different from the other ones. They were no coherent force, they just were a bunch of single miniatures thrown together. Now, some 20 years later, and tons of gathered painting experience, it could literally be tons considering how many metal minis I painted in the process. I know the errors of my ways and how to fix them, and while all of what I'm going to show you applies to every project you will ever start, no other gaming system is more suited to illustrate some of these ideas than Infinity the game. Unlike other systems, just take Kill Team, for example, where every mini is more or less the same. Infinity has these different categories of minis within a force. Light infantry, heavy infantry, remotely controlled units like drones, killer robots, Formula 1 cars, Skynet, your fridge wanting to kill you, Wall-E, Robot Wars. Okay, it's time to stop. And these giant tactical armored gears ranging from unmanned robots, baby carriers, wolves in spacesuits, to walking guns and other abominations like this fabulous Gilliman. And the faction I'm collecting has this styled up to 11, being 3 different races rolled into one, resulting in a large variety of miniatures and styles within a singular army. So we need to find ways to draw them together, and we also have to put a little more thought into the color scheme to make them feel like a coherent fighting force and not turn them into a clown convention. It's actually quite simple to avoid the biggest mistakes in that regard. Here's the first trick, and this might sound obvious, but it is important. Bases literally create a small scenery around your minis. They communicate a setting. That could be an outlandish alien planet, a hostile ash desert, classic ruined battlefield, lush jungle worlds, or whatever else your creativity can come up with. You can create an environment where your characters blend in, or you can deliberately make them look out of place. Ultimately, it's all about telling a story. However, whatever you choose, you need to make sure all bases look like they belong to the same environment. Use the same flock, the same type of rocks, the same type of rubble. And here's a little bonus tip. Try to integrate your minis with their bases. It could be snow spilling over and catching on their feet, clothing or cloaks. This also works great when using dust or mud. All of this helps with creating the feeling of your minis existing in and interacting with this environment you created, instead of just posing for a picture in a studio. Another way you can do this is to right away extend the main colors of the base into the lower parts of your mini. If the base is covered by snow, this could be a cold blue, or it's some outlandish planet and the armor of your minis reflects the weird ground colors. Not only will this draw your minis and your bases together, it leads us directly into tip number 2. And that is, try using a universal shadow color. Choosing combined army means I have to deal with very different types of minis. But if I use the same shadow color for all of them, I can have different midtones on very different minis, but they will all share that one color and the feeling that color creates. Almost like an ambient light creating the moods for your army, and this will tie them together no matter what you do with the rest. You can see the dark magenta that I used for my pre-shading is still showing in both the armor and the cloak, but also in the shadow of the bases and the weapons, basically anything that is facing the ground. Of course, this also applies to highlight colors. Just paint all individual elements and textures in the way you want to, and at the very least, for your last highlight, mix in the same color, no matter what the base tone was. You can use a warm tone or a cold one, and if you use exactly the opposite of what you used for the pre-shading, that's going to create extra contrast as a bonus. You can see that I used a cool desaturated universal highlight color on the armor and the cloaks, for example. This creates the feeling of all surfaces being illuminated by the same global light. And this will even tie minis together that have drastically different base colors. This will get more evident once I start working on this giant avatar or Dr. Worm here that look drastically different from my Shasvasti troops that make the bulk of my army. What you will notice in this video is that all of these tips are not about individual painting skill. All of this is more about finding a style that you like and being consistent with it, making a plan and executing it. You can always go back later and touch up models if you wanted to speed through them to finish your army to be able to play. And I'm sure you know the feeling, the last mini of a squad always looks better than the first one. And that's because you build muscle memory, you gain experience, and you went through that feedback loop of, does this really look good? Maybe I'll adjust this tiny detail and it will look better. So you also build experience with the color scheme. This video is sponsored by Corvus Belli. Since it's just between you and me, don't tell them that I love their minis and would have done a video like this anyway sooner or later, even without them paying me. Infinity, the game, has been released back in 2005, and ever since then their prime objective was to innovate and produce better and better minis. And I think that paid off big time, as I would count Infinity Miniatures among some of the best ranges out there. The detail is crazy, the style of the minis is very sleek, it's very distinct and futuristic, unlike anything else out there. Every time I paint them, it makes me feel like I'm painting a historical mini just from the future. That's how good they are. Corvus Belli have created this amazing universe. They have a massive and intriguing backstory built around their game that even spawned an epic TV series that looks super promising. The game is fast-paced and quick to set up, and what I like the most about it is the reactive core mechanic. You can react to actions your opponent is taking while it's their turn. It's not a boring I go, you go system, and you can even download the rulebook for free. How cool is that? Go check out Infinity, the game, using the link in the description. You won't regret it. Tip number 3. Repeat colors as much as possible. Now, what the hell do I mean with that? I recommend to figure out a main color that you will try to use on prominent features of all minis of your army. That's the number 1 property that will make them look like they belong together. And that color is going to be what defines your army. Here I went for this desaturated green on the bulk of the armor. But once that is done, now that's where it's getting interesting. Because now it's time to think of additional colors that you can use that can appear on all of your minis. What elements are there that can appear in a similar color even though they might not be exactly the same thing? Whether that's corresponding elements like cloaks and other clothing or uniforms, similar technology, weapons, accessories, or even effects like the glow from a stealth field engaging. I painted all the under armor of this army in this bright orange tone, and it becomes a very prominent feature because of that. But not all aliens are wearing underpants apparently. So we need to think about ways to add this color to these minis in a plausible way. For example, I could paint other parts with similar purposes the same way, like these connective moving parts on Dr. Worm's armor here. Maybe the system that runs his movement on the inside is based on some similar technology. Or maybe we apply it to something completely different, like the lenses. I think I really like that. But of course, we don't have to force this color into all minis, since we already have the universal shadow color. Even if we use slightly different colors on each mini, they will still look coherent because of that. But of course, this is just another piece in the puzzle that is very powerful if you decide to use it. So now we have 2 relatively bright main colors that will compete for attention, but we still have additional elements that are neither this or that, but still need some definition. Any additional color that we add at this point should fall into one of 2 categories. The first one is avoiding to use another chromatic color as much as possible. Adding an additional bright red element, for example, and we are in clown territory. So I recommend that if you want to add another color, make sure it's desaturated by adding black or by mixing in a complementary color. The second approach is that you simply don't use a color to begin with, use white or black instead. They typically appear neutral in the grand scheme of color composition and don't add to color overload. In this case, I went for an off-white to distinguish these parts of the leg armor, and I used the blue mixed with black as the base for all the cloaks. All of this is typically part of my All the Color Theory You Will Ever Need workshop. Let me know if you want to see a dedicated video on that. I also have tons of material like this already up on my Patreon, so if you're interested, join up and check it out. Huge shout out to all my existing patrons that you can see on screen right now for keeping the channel running. Think of your army the same way you would think about a single miniature. You would not implement an endless number of colors and paints when you are planning an individual paint job. So keep your palette limited in your army as well. If you need another color, desaturate it or make it a form of white and black to keep it neutral, or mix it with one of the colors you already used. That way it becomes a variant of that color and isn't sticking out like a sore thumb. If you have effects like technology that's emitting light, magic or weapons fire, make them relatively similar. In my case, I had this idea about an effect that underlines the army's theme. This particular wing of the combined army excels in terror through stealth and deception. So I decided to make it look like this one here is just engaging his camouflage, which makes him melt into the environment. Following that idea, I wanted my skirmisher here to have a hacking device and also wanted it represented on the mini. So I built this greenish glow effect, only then to realize that it clashes with the orange glow. And also it's another color in the composition of the army. So instead I made it look more in line with the cloak effect color-wise. Tip number 5, add details that make the minis look like they belong together. This is an ongoing project for me, and I'll release another video on Monday documenting the start of my combined army properly. So you should hit that subscribe button if you want to follow along. It's going to be a fun ride exploring all the aspects of army painting, and we will figure tons of tips and tricks and shortcuts out together. But standing only at the start of this endeavor also means I have not decided on a few elements yet, namely which markings I want to add to the composition. But stuff like war paints on tribesmen or sept markings on Tau, for example, are a great way to draw forces together. And especially here where we have really different models, big ones, small ones, robots, worms, thin aliens, thick aliens, figuring out some sort of markings of the same color and symbology will draw them all together and show that they are a coherent force. If you decide to do something like this, just follow the rules for color choices that I laid out in tip number 3. I've not figured out which markings I will put on mine yet. I will put it off until I painted more of these minis and I get a better feeling for what type of pattern and what color makes sense in the context. So if you want to see a full guide for how I painted these minis and follow the evolution of my combined army, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet and watch the next episode by clicking on this video on screen right now. I hope this video taught you something new. Leave a thumbs up if it did, and if you want to do me a favor, keep pushing that pigment and see you in the next one.